Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas, everyone out there. Second show of the day for me. We're talking basketball this time around. Football was earlier. That's up on Establish a Run if you want to get our breakdown of the 3-game slate. If you're watching us for free on YouTube, we do this 4 times a week. We're putting up top plays projections every single day for the NBA slates all season long. And this is kind of a sneak peek into the shows that we do leading up to lock every day. So welcome if you're joining us. I've got Drew Dinkmeyer here with me, one of the great wizards of NBA DFS. Drew, how are you doing on this Christmas Eve?
Doing well. I wish the teams would have given me a Christmas gift of filling out the injury report. That would have been useful. But we're piecing some things together. It sounds like Marcus Morris is going to be out. Draymond's going to be out again. We'll see about DJ Augustine. And I think those are some of the bigger ones that I was looking for. So doing well on the whole. It's nice to have a slower paced content day after jamming in 12 games yesterday. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm ready to settle in, talk casually about basketball, not worry about news breaking while we're on the show and having to adjust everything, games getting canceled. And so I'm in a much more relaxed spirit than yesterday for sure.
Yep, I got some ribs on the smoker. Just wrapped them in foil right before we came on. So probably get out, throw a few discs around after this. It's 60 degrees in Denver today. Nice day. So, yeah. Yesterday, midstream, of course, the Houston game was canceled. So we had that. I got flagged for using that Bulls intro. YouTube brass did not like that. So a bit of a rocky start. But I think we'll get, and of course the Bulls didn't do shit, which, holy
YouTube
smokes,
should flag
man.
the Bulls. YouTube should have flagged them for their performance yesterday.
What in the world was that? They're at home and they get down. I think they were down 38 at one time.
Oh, they got down 40 in midway through the third quarter. That's an accomplishment.
I don't know, man. I don't know what to think of that. But Laurie had a good game. Levine was in foul trouble. Our boy Wendell Carter Jr. not so good. No. And your secondary flag plant in Tobias Harris was not the best, but I smashed with DeJounte Murray, so I'm feeling good.
Very bad. Yeah, the flag plant segment caught me off guard, and I responded very strongly with 2 of the biggest duds that we possibly had in the projections last night for sure.
We'll give you an honorary win because you were pushing Brogdon really hard, and Brogdon was surprisingly not owned at all. I mean, he was 5%, which really threw me for a loop. Yeah, but that was a good price against the Knicks. I mean, I thought he would be 15, 20%. I was pretty shocked at his ownership.
Yeah, he's just boring. Nobody likes to own him. And you look, and point guard was really strong yesterday. We talked about that on the show that, especially on FanDuel where you had Terry Rozier who went nuclear with 10 threes and 40-plus points. You had John Morant underpriced on FanDuel. You had DeJounte, who we loved on both sites. So he just kind of got squeezed a little bit. He was a really solid play. Plumlee was a really solid play, especially on DraftKings. He was the better center salary relief play than Wendell Carter Jr. So definitely some hits for the projections, some misses as well. And a lot of stuff that missed was Wendell was really, really bad. But a lot of the stuff that missed was also really unusual foul trouble related situations. Zach LaVine never gets into foul trouble.
No, that was crazy.
That was one of the...
We had Rozier as the number 1 play on FanDuel in our top plays, so I hope people played him. I had him in my lineup. I did not end up playing him once Harden was out. I didn't quite need the salary savings, but we've been pretty high on Rozier. We were high on him in the preseason stuff, and it was just a really good price at 4.6. So I didn't think 55.
It was hard to miss at point guard, though.
Yeah.
I mean, with the guys that we liked yesterday. We liked DeJounte, we liked Brogdon, we liked Ja, and we liked Rozier. So, point guard was a pretty big win for us yesterday. Some of the other positions weren't as great. Larry Nance went nuts as Andre Drummond got into foul trouble. Any of my concerns about his rates playing alongside Drummond in that projection being fragile were relieved by Drummond getting into foul trouble and them splitting the minutes quite a bit in terms of being staggered. So, fun opening slate, though, in terms of a lot of basketball, a lot of information to digest. And it was just so much, it felt like such a reprieve today sitting down to do minutes for 5 games and being like, oh, okay, yeah, this job's not as hard as it felt yesterday.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about this slate on a high level. I think it's a different approach between FanDuel and DraftKings. Basically, the way I was looking at it on DraftKings was you are going to probably get 1 stud, I think, and Giannis is the guy that I like the best, and we'll talk more about who you like the best as far as studs go. And then you're kind of living in the not quite punt range, the 5 to 6K range, a bunch of those characters. FanDuel is a little bit looser, so you can get, Steph Curry is underpriced, Drew Holiday is underpriced, so you can get, maybe a tier up from the guys that you're seeing on DraftKings. I don't know. It's just a little bit of a different slate. And Giannis is now a power forward on FanDuel, which is a change from last year. And all the time he's been a small forward. So that's going to be an interesting development going forward because Anthony Davis has always been basically like a lock button on FanDuel anytime he was playing. But now you've got Giannis in the conversation at power forward. So that's going to change that position up this year. And then, I think you got some cheap centers you can look at. What are your thoughts just on a macro level on this slate?
Yeah, I think most of your thoughts are what I would echo just quickly from like running, optimal lineups and kind of looking through them and how they look. A lot of the stuff that I've been doing has been more on the micro level in terms of getting projections set and like understanding and writing top plays and understand the fragility around where projections are. So I would say I've done less of like the macro building stuff. But I would say in general, just one thing to kind of remember early on in the season is, there's a combination of things that I think work in the favor of really like balanced builds early in the season. One, there are mispricings that keep cheaper guys on the radar for everybody else, and it makes it easier to want to jam in studs. But as we've seen with some of the studs, the minutes kind of do get managed a little bit. Now, that certainly wasn't the case with Giannis and the Bucks last night. But I do think for tournaments, that'll continue to be a strong approach, especially on this slate where I think a lot of the value that's available to us is still a little bit fragile in terms of the projections, in terms of the minutes, especially on the back end of some of these rotations. So that would be kind of my overall take is like your approach is certainly the way to approach things from a cash game perspective. I think in tournaments, even more balanced lineups might be really, really fruitful tomorrow.
Yeah, I have the FanDuel optimal lineups here. And basically what that means is if you run our projections through an optimizer, it'll find what team should score the most points. So we have a deal with Fantasy Labs. This is their site using our projections. And you can see the lineups that right now we think will be the best. And I think the build is fairly clear on FanDuel. It's like a Curry Holiday pairing at point guard, Paul George probably at shooting guard. So you're kind of getting into that, like I said, that upper second tier, and then a stud, I think, at power forward with some punts around them at small forward and center. And you could look at Giannis or Anthony Davis. I think you're going to want one of the two. You're probably not going to be able to afford both in cash games, but if you're playing tournaments, anything is on the table. And if you look over at DraftKings, it's more of, like I said, kind of you're just living in like the 5K range, and then you can mix in a few guys like Middleton, and then you have one spend that you can allow that's probably either Giannis or if you like Luka, I think he's in that conversation. I don't know. Who do you like on the top end? For me, it's definitely Giannis right now.
So I like Giannis a lot. I think we saw the Warriors are really going to struggle defensively quite a bit. Obviously, Brooklyn has a ton of offensive firepower, and that's a big part of what happened on opening night in terms of the Warriors. But defensively, without Draymond Green, playing a rookie center, and then playing like Eric Pascal, who's not a great defender, Steph, who I think is a good team defender, but obviously struggles a little bit in terms of staying in front of guys. And so they don't have a lot of great perimeter defense. And the Weissman, while a very big dude, I think the rim protection stuff from Weissman is going to take some time because he's still like feeling his way out defensively in terms of understanding NBA coverages. So I think Giannis, they played 36 minutes. Middleton and Drew played 38. I think that's not going to be the case going forward. They played the entire fourth quarter, basically, Giannis and Middleton and Brook Lopez for the most part, because they were way down going into the start of the fourth quarter, and Bud decided to start with the starters and see if they could make a dent, and they did, and they just kind of rode it. I think the baseline expectation for Giannis and Middleton and Drew should be in that like 33 to 34 range. Then if you take into account some blowout risk for the game being a 10-point spread, you get them down to maybe the 31 to 33 range. The question mark for this one in terms of the minute ceiling is DJ Augustine. If he plays, I think that'll bring Drew Holiday's minutes down a little bit and brings the minute ceiling of everybody else down because they clearly were uncomfortable with Jalen Adams as their backup point guard. He did not play last night, and they only played Sam Merrill, their first-round pick, like a few minutes. So for Giannis, long way of saying he's the best guy. I think he's going to be the best guy on a permanent basis. But I do not think he's so far above everybody else because I don't think the 36 minutes from yesterday is real. I think
Yeah,
he's
I have the
probably going to, like, even 32 and a half where we have him right now might be on the more aggressive side of where I think he could end up, especially if the game's not competitive.
I've got popcorn machine up right here, and you can basically see. I mean, Drew Holiday. It seems fairly clear that they just, like you said, they didn't feel comfortable with their backup point guard because he played a pretty uniform rotation throughout the game. But you can see with Giannis, I think normally he's taken like a 3-minute, 4-minute break there in the fourth quarter, and he didn't. So that's worth noting. I wouldn't count on it, but I do think it shows that they might be willing to play these guys more than they have in the past. And certainly they took a lot of heat in the offseason for not being able to get these guys up to 40 minutes in the playoffs. So I think they might be, another minute or two on average compared to where they were last year. So that bears monitoring. But Giannis, he's just an absolute stud. So you can't really go wrong with him. I guess you got Luka in the conversation. You've got Anthony Davis. You've got LeBron. Let's continue the conversation a little bit more on the top end, and then we can get into position by position. I thought I'm a little bit worried about the Lakers. They looked just a little bit slow, kind of like they were playing on a back-to-back, which is not great when it's the first game of the season. They also played a deep rotation, and they seemed pretty willing to not put the guys back out there, pulling the plug, I would hesitate to call it a blowout. Plenty of teams would have had their stars out there. I mean, it was like a 10, 15-point game basically towards the end, and they just didn't come back. So I think they're going to be pretty conservative with minutes. I don't know. I'm not sure how much to read into that going forward, but I'm not enthused, I guess, to be playing the Lakers right now. What do you think?
Yes, trying to save you from the sirens of New York City while you were talking about the Lakers, but certainly sounding the alarms on the minutes ceiling for the Lakers stars there. I will note that if the game was close and competitive, Anthony Davis, if he finished out those last 3.5 minutes, would have finished at around 34.5 minutes. So I think AD is still okay in terms of where he can get to, but LeBron, I think it's going to be a tough road to hoe. And so I've got the other part about LeBron that I'll note is that there's some projection fragility in terms of his base rate efficiency, because I thought they'd split LeBron and Schroeder up a lot more than they did. I think it was of Schroeder's 28, 29 minutes, something like that. He was only on pace to play like 10 of those separate from LeBron. So a lot of minutes paired with LeBron. And if a lot of LeBron's minutes are paired with Schroeder, they might be saying, hey, one of the ways we're going to take it easier on LeBron early in the season, especially, is we're just going to play him off ball a lot. And if he's playing off ball a lot, he is not the same sort of fantasy point per monster that we're accustomed to. And so I wrote this in Top Plays, which will get published, after the show here.
I actually just pushed it.
Okay, so but basically, I think it's going to be hard for Schroeder and LeBron James to hit their ceiling in the same game, which means for me, that's like a max one of situation if you're creating optimizer rules. In LeBron in general, I would take a backseat on right now. I just think combination of projection fragility with not knowing what efficiency level he's operating at from a health perspective, from a role perspective, and then lack of minutes ceiling. I think you got to wait till the price comes down substantially compared to the other studs on the slate.
He also rolled his ankle a little bit, which I don't think is a big deal, but it's just another thing that doesn't help. Okay, let's get into the position by position here. And this is our Top Plays article that we post every single day on Establish the Run. Basically, we're telling you the plays that we think are the strongest at each position, and we do it for DraftKings and FanDuel. Let's start at point guard. As I already alluded to, I think you can get to the higher end on FanDuel at point guard. Steph Curry is underpriced at 8.7. I think we'll see his salary probably settle in closer to 10K as the season goes on. There may be issues with blowouts, and there certainly is here. It's a 10-point spread. It's on the road. But, I mean, he basically got there last game in 3 quarters. I don't know. What are you thinking on him? He's definitely a better play on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings.
So the nice thing about Steph is, if you're concerned about blowouts, the really nice thing about Steph is the way that they're doing his rotation. They're playing the entire first. Then he's sitting like the first 7 minutes or so of the second quarter, and then he's playing the entire third. So even in a blowout situation like we saw with Brooklyn, he's pretty likely to get close to 30. Like, it's unlikely that it's getting caught in the mid-20s where you really suck out all the value. And what we saw from Steph was a lot of usage. He was on the ball a lot more. Mike Gallagher noted this in the 3 ball, which is one of the daily pieces of content Monday through Friday that you'll get on this YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe. And he noted that Steph played basically with the ball in his hands for like 5 full minutes in the game, which was more than he had done in even like his MVP seasons when he was playing more minutes. So I think the rates are going to be really strong. The usage is going to be really strong. And I really do think like if you're playing Giannis, or especially if you're playing like multiple Bucks in the same lineup, Steph is the guy you kind of have to have on the other end, because if there's any way the game is staying competitive, it's through Stephen Curry. Like it's not through Kelly Oubre and Andrew Wiggins, it's through Steph Curry. So I think Steph has a pivotal role on this slate in the sense that the Bucks are all the guys who are going to project as the best and most efficient point per minute guys. And if you start to play multiple of them together, you want to have Steph on the other end of it. A lot easier to do on FanDuel than on DraftKings because of the price on Steph on FanDuel compared to on DraftKings. I think on DraftKings, he's a weaker play. He's more fully priced. You need to find kind of closer to that competitive game expectation for him, which is 34 minutes. That's what they're trying to get him to. I've got him at 31.5 for this game, so I'm chopping off some of that blowout risk, because the good news about Steph with the minutes and whatnot is like he's pretty likely to get to 30 just based on his rotations. But there's more time for that game to get out of hand in the fourth quarter because he usually isn't coming back till the 4 or 5 minute mark. And so I've got him at 31.5 minutes. If he played at 34, I think he'd be closer to worth that price on DraftKings compared to some of the other studs. But right now, you want to be looking for these price discounts on Steph in games that you're concerned about the competitiveness. And I don't think this is going to be a thing all year long for Golden State. It's just starting off at Brooklyn, at Milwaukee. That's a tough start. Those are going to be 2 of the better teams in the league this year.
Yeah, and they're also missing Draymond, which isn't helping.
Yeah.
So hopefully when he's back, that'll help stabilize a little bit. So, yeah, he's 10K on DraftKings, which is putting him right there with Giannis and Luka and all those guys. So I think he's going to go pretty under-owned in tournaments. If you want to fit him in with Giannis, that's interesting. Or you could do Steph and Middleton. Those are some approaches I think might work in tournaments where you might be able to get Steph at like 10% here. I don't know. People love playing him, so it might get inflated regardless. But I do think it's pretty safe to say he'll be on less than the other guys. Drew Holiday. We already talked about him a little bit in his minutes. I think it's mostly just, if DJ Augustine isn't playing, he's going to play a lot. I think his price just doesn't quite fit builds on DraftKings at 7.5, whereas you can easily get him on FanDuel. So it's not to say he's not a good play on DraftKings. I think I would mix him in tournaments for sure. It just didn't quite fit with the approach I was taking. And that was more Eric Bledsoe, who's a shooting guard at FanDuel. We'll save him and talk about him when we get to shooting guard. What about Jeff Teague? He's super cheap. Had a pretty good game for his first game in Boston. Only 4.2 over on DraftKings. So it's more of a DraftKings play. But, I mean, that's a really good price.
Yeah, I think it's a really good price on Teague. Boston is one of the teams that I'm least confident in who they're going to roll out there as their 5th starter for this game. They surprised us a little bit with Daniel Tice in the preseason finale dress rehearsal. It was Javonte Green, who didn't play a single minute yesterday. In the Tice-Thompson combo, when you look at like Milwaukee in terms of how they are offensively and what you have to be concerned about, there's some similarities to what you have to be concerned about with Brooklyn. In terms of, freakish monster 4 that like is very difficult to find an opposing matchup to guard. So I was talking about this with Mike Gallagher, and he thinks Semi Ojeleye might start. Semi is a guy who played well last night, also has historically been used heavily by Brad Stevens in matchups against Giannis Antetokounmpo. He probably is their best option against Kevin Durant, but he was their best option against Giannis yesterday, and they started Daniel Tice. So I don't know if they're going to start Tice again. I think Tice is fine in terms of like lateral side to side, but certainly KD is a little bit quicker, I think, side to side than Giannis is. Giannis is a little bit more power, and I think Tice's size is a little bit more important. So it could be Semi, it could be Tatum. Tatum on Durant, which would open up Teague as a starter. And if Teague's a starter, I think you could push him to like 28, 29 minutes because they just really don't have much confidence in the bench pieces. And Teague played pretty well in the preseason. I think the main reason they're not starting Teague is they have nothing on the bench and they want to stagger some of these guys a little bit. But Teague, I think, is a really solid price on DraftKings. I'm pretty confident that he approaches like the 25-ish minute scenario regardless. And I think there's a little bit more upside there. So I think he's a pretty good play on DraftKings. He's priced really aggressively on FanDuel, and I think he's pretty much out of the conversation over there.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically priced at where he was last year on FanDuel at 5.8, and it's just not the same role. We were talking about this some yesterday, and down at 4.2, 25 minutes on DraftKings, he's one of our top plays. And there's not a lot to like sub 3K, so I think I'm more looking at guys like him that I feel good about. As far as the punts, it's like Maxi Kleber and Pat Connaughton. We'll talk about them, but I think they're both pretty thin. A lot of the guys listed at point guard on DraftKings, our best plays are other positions. Jimmy Butler, we'll talk about them when we get down the line. Tyler Hero is also a small forward on FanDuel. What about Luka at the top? I don't know if there's a whole lot to say. I mean, the guy's a stud.
No,
he got a little banged up last night, though, did he not?
Yeah. He did. He was just frustrated with the way he was playing. I think he's fine. It's just it's a pretty full price tag. I think Giannis is very likely to be more efficient for sure. And then it's like, how many more minutes can Luka play than Giannis? Like, how many minutes are you sacrificing in terms of what the ceiling looks like? And that's where it gets a little bit more challenging. Also, I think the Lakers are probably going to be, a solid defensive team when all things shake out once again. So Luka's fine. No qualms there. I did want to touch on Drew, who you mentioned briefly, but the one thing I'll note about Drew is if DJ Augustine does play, I would drop Drew's minutes projection. I would probably drop it to that 32 and a half, 33 range that I've got kind of the other starters. I would also drop Pat Connaughton's minutes projection in that case. I would take out some Sam Merrill minutes altogether. I just think Augustine's a guy that's going to play like 18 to 22 for them, like that George Hill role. I think that's kind of what he's going to do, and that just removes some of the minutes security from a lot of their main key guys. So Drew looks really, really good right now on FanDuel. Even if I took him down like 2 minutes, he's still going to look pretty good. But I think that if that happens, that would open up some situations where, you start to look at like Lonzo and like, you start to find other combinations that might work. And so I think FanDuel looks pretty clear now, but it could get shaken up a little bit. And then the other thing that I wanted to note, just because they're priced so closely, I think it's a really tough thing with Steph and Kyrie in the sense that Steph's ceiling is so much higher than Kyrie's, because if you get the full competitive game from Steph, you're getting so many more shots, which is hard to imagine given we're talking about Kyrie Irving here. But Kyrie Irving's minutes ceiling is pretty touchy. I mean, we've got him at 33. I think he's going to have a tight range on minutes because they're just such a deep team. But I think Kyrie, if the ownership gets outsized in Steph's direction, I think Kyrie would be a natural pivot from Steph. He's a little bit more expensive. And that's where it comes into like how much ownership difference is going to be the two of them. Is one guy going to be 40 and the other guy 10? Or is one guy going to be 35 and the other guy 25? And the more outsized it gets, the more likely I'd be willing to pivot to Kyrie over Steph in tournaments.
Kyrie costs $200 more. We have him projected for 2.1 less FanDuel points, but I do agree that he's going to come in at less ownership. Quick note on Lonzo Ball, who is also in our top plays. He got in foul trouble last game. So if you're looking at the minutes he played, 29, well, you can see right here on Popcorn Machine that he checked out like 30 seconds into the second quarter and did not come back. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind in these situations is sometimes these guys, when they get in foul trouble in the first half, they'll play more in the second half. So you can't just take the second half and say, well, that's how many minutes, if you double that he would have played. But I think it's pretty fair to say he would have played more than 29 minutes. We have him projected at 34 right now, and that puts him as a pretty solid play, even though it's not a great matchup. Anything else to note on Lonzo?
Well, it just gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about the Pelicans' backcourt rotation in general, which maybe this is a nice segue into Bledsoe, because we can just like segue to shooting guard. So in general, what I noticed from the Pelicans last night is they basically are playing like a 7.5 man rotation. This is going to be one of the tightest rotations in all of basketball, because they played Ingram 37, Zion 30, Adams 30.5, Lonzo 29 with the foul trouble, Bledsoe 34.5, JJ Redick 29, Josh Hart 27, and then Nicolo Melli is like the seventh guy basically, or the half of the seventh guy at 13.5. They gave Jackson Hayes like 6 minutes. I think they'll probably keep doing that where he'll get a few. And then Nickeil Alexander-Walker played 4 minutes when Ball was in foul trouble that I don't think will be an issue. Um, so I think there's room for like each of these guards to play mid 30s minutes if they're going to play these really small lineups. And they played about 12 Zion minutes at the center spot. So if you think about it, like Steven Adams, let's say he's going to play 30, you've got 18 left to fill at the center spot. Okay, they're going to give 6 to 8 to Jackson Hayes. That's a lot of Zion at the center spot, which means that's a lot of minutes open for Hart, Redick, Bledsoe, Ball to all play together in 3 guard kind of sets with Ingram as the 4 and those 3 guys in the guard spots. And so there's just a lot of minutes there for these guys. I still think their playing time is impacted by one another and their usage, their roles are impacted by one another. So it's probably unlikely that you see like Lonzo and Eric Bledsoe get into optimal lineups together. So you might want to consider not using them together in lineups. But I think there's still enough playing time opportunity for the roles to be there. I think on a game-to-game basis, in terms of who's handling the ball and like really orchestrating the offense, we saw a lot of Brandon Ingram initiating last night, which I think is really good for his fantasy value going forward. There were some big concerns about how his DFS value was impacted by playing alongside Zion Williamson last year. His rates took a big hit. If he's going to be facilitating a lot more, that opens up a path for him to kind of get there in games with Zion still. But that takes the ball out of the hands of Bledsoe and Lonzo. So I think these guys have really solid minutes floors and really compelling minutes ceilings. But I think the usage and the fantasy point per minute production is going to be highly variant because I think it's going to be dependent on things like steals and getting transition buckets and getting transition assists. I think in the half court, they're going to be doing a lot more of secondary initiating and not primary because I think the ball is going to be in Ingram's hands a lot more. So I think they're pretty good cash game plays, but guys that if ownership is really going to flood to them, to be leery of. And that is what I think could be the case in tournaments with Eric Bledsoe tomorrow.
Yeah, and Bledsoe, I mean, it's interesting looking at his rotation. He didn't play the last 7.5 minutes. The game was 16 points.
And he still played 34.5 minutes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he like in the right scenario, he could play into he could play like 37, 38, like Ingram just played. Like that's out there for him in the right scenario. But I think what they did in that game against Toronto, and I think Toronto and Miami are very similar opponents. They're teams that are very good defensively. They're teams that have a lot of shooting and really force you to, if you don't spread the floor against them, they will lock you up defensively. We saw that in that series against Milwaukee, right? Milwaukee had trouble kind of spreading the floor. And so I think Hart and Redick were ways for New Orleans to close with these smaller lineups with Zion at the center, but Redick's shooting is really a necessity to close. So I think his minutes are actually a lot more secure than they were last year, which is weird to say. But I think his shooting, Stan Van Gundy recognizes, is really a necessity for them to close. And so I think you might see spots where it's 2 of Hart, Bledsoe, Ball, JJ, Ingram, Zion as their closing unit.
All right, moving along. Well, last note on Bledsoe, he's a great play on both sides. He's just
he's a great play. My only concern is ownership for GPPs. Is that if he gets really really over owned, his floor in terms of playing time and opportunity will be very very stable. But I think the production will vary in terms of what the ceiling could really be. And so if this is a guy that's going to push like 50% ownership on this 5-game slate, then you might dial it back a little bit. But if he was going to be like 30% owned, 25% owned, still a great play, I think.
Yeah, and I think he got some clean pivots, and some of the other guys that we're about to discuss. Josh Richardson is similarly priced on both sites. Marcus Smart is closer on FanDuel, a little bit priced out on DraftKings. Tyler Hero, however, you can play at shooting guard on DraftKings, and he's right there. Any of those guys jump out to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like Tyler Hero, I really was surprised by how much Miami's main guys played in the first game. I don't know if it's just like they can't help themselves and they were losing in the fourth quarter and they just never want to lose. And so, but like Jimmy playing almost 36 minutes, Bam 35, uh, Goran Dragic 26. I was like, I kind of thought Jimmy might be eased in a little bit more like a 30-31, kind of what they're doing with LeBron. Jimmy's younger than LeBron, but still kind of thought that might be the way they go after they sat him all preseason. Um, and that's where some of the upside for Tyler Hero is, right? Like the rates and stuff that we saw last year were really strong in the second unit, kind of leading the charge. In the playoffs, he played with the starters a lot more and he held it. I'm pretty bullish on him, but the thing that I will note in general is one area to consider, and it's also like the first game of the slate. So, in general, on these MME slates, where it's one game at a time, I think it's always more advantageous to play players from later games because you get a little bit more information when you have close decisions. It being the first game, but the thing that I was going there is New Orleans was really good defensively last night against Toronto. They held Toronto to like 100 points, and New Orleans played so fast last year, and they are playing slow. They're playing very, very slow compared to the way that they played last year. And so projection systems, Vegas models, all these things that are working off of last year's data and trying to find a new baseline for this team. If it's a really big change, it might be we might all be slow to adapt on the data side of things, just because it's such a big change. It's hard. Like you move incrementally, you move a guess that might be in between what they've done in the preseason and what you've seen now, because it's a small number of games. But if it is that really big change, there's a chance that we're over projecting a lot of the players in that game. And that's just one of the things I wanted to note regarding Hero. I think his upside is better than Bledsoe's, because I think I can see more situations where he's like really dominating possessions, closing for them. I don't ever really see that being the case for Bledsoe. I think Bledsoe really like got there last night by hitting threes in an efficient manner, which is really not his thing. So I think Heroes is a good clean pivot off Bledsoe, but I do think that game in general I have some mild kind of concerns on with regards to like trying to figure out what the new baseline is on New Orleans games as a whole.
Yeah, and it's definitely worth noting that at least as a tiebreaker, if not a little bit more weight should be put on the fact that having the guys play later is worth a lot because you can move around. Like if you get behind, you can get off plays that are owned. Maybe there's news that changes things around. I don't think that'll be as much in play on this slate, but it might be. And it's definitely going to be in play a lot throughout the season with all the COVID stuff and everything, just being able to make decisions later. And actually, we had a question higher up in the chat saying, as a newer NBA player, should I be optimizing my lineups throughout the slate with new projections and news? Absolutely.
Yes.
And that's going to be a huge edge for you if you're willing to do that and put in the time and be around your computer. And we'll be updating our projections through the last game. So most people won't do that. And if you can, sometimes some really, really good plays will open up throughout the course of the day. And you can win a lot. I remember a couple Christmases ago when Zubac was on the Lakers. I think he wasn't supposed to start, and he ended up starting. I don't remember the exact details, but I ended up playing him. I moved into him. I didn't have him when the day started, and he went for like 45, and I just, he wasn't owned. I just smashed everybody. So that was a fun day.
I think that's one of the big edges in NBA, because if you are willing to work, there's a lot of opportunity to continue to make decisions that have more information than your opponents when your opponents made their decisions. And so I think there's a lot of benefit to doing that. I also think in general, like while we're on that topic, this slate in particular, I think if you're playing in like mass multi-entry and you're creating a lot of different lineups, one of the things that I talk about is you don't get very many opportunities where you have such a small slate that you have all the information right ahead of you, and you can one game at a time swap your way through. And so if you're playing lots of lineups, I think it's anyone that you think is a playable play in Miami, New Orleans, you should have some of in an MME pool, because you almost want to basically say like, okay, I played the first game, let me filter in my good lineups, my lineups that have the best plays that did the best in that game, and let me re-optimize those to the best plays, and kind of incrementally keep like filtering your lineups down till you get to like the lineup that is doing your best with like 2 games left, and make the best decisions on it. And conversely, the lineups that are off to poor starts, getting away from like the Milwaukee chalk that there's probably going to be on this slate, and different things like that.
Yep, great point. All right, anything else to say on shooting guard? I think, Chris Middleton, I guess we should mention, had a great game. Yep. Last outing, scored over 50 fantasy points last night. And he's a guy, if he can get hot, if he's going to play minutes, like he's a good play. I generally kind of shy away from him, in the price tags and when it's in the mid 7s or higher. But he's a fine play. I don't know. Any thoughts on him?
Yeah, I will. I don't have too many thoughts on him. I just think the minutes are going to come down from where they were. But I think everyone against Golden State has a chance to be really efficient for Milwaukee. I would just be leery of playing like two out of Middleton, Drew, Giannis together without having a Warrior player back. Like they can get there, but it might be a little bit tougher. And maybe Drew and Middleton could get there, like if Giannis got into foul trouble or something like that. But the guy that I did want to talk about that I think is a really interesting tournament play is Marcus Smart. He was on pace to play like 38. I'm not sure where he ended up, but he played like 19 first half minutes. Tatum played a little bit less in the first half, which was a little fluky, and it's just because they had a unit that was kind of cooking out there, and Brad Stevens said he let him go. But Smart, I think, only took like 3 shots, which, I mean, he's not a high usage player to begin with, but yeah, he played 38 and a half minutes. But if they're gonna play this game to win against Brooklyn, who has a lot of ball dominant kind of guards, Marcus Smart's going to be out there a lot. And when Marcus Smart goes off, it's usually through steals and blocks. And against high usage offensive players, I like taking those opportunities on him, especially on FanDuel.
Yep.
Now the price is difficult. The price is not great on both sites. It's 6,700 on DK, 6,400 on FanDuel. But that is why the ownership is going to be low. That alongside the first game being so disappointing from a usage perspective. And so I do not mind taking shots on Marcus Smart in tournaments. I also don't mind taking shots on Josh Richardson, who played a lot in that first game. Gary Harris, who played a lot in that first game. And Gary Harris is another one of these guys that I think he's going to have to be out there a lot because of who the Clippers have in terms of their wing, offensive players. So those guys, like, I really don't mind taking shots on in GPPs. I think they'll be a little bit under-owned. And then Connaughton, I like, if DJ Augustine doesn't play, I'll be honest, 2 guys that I'm really interested in for GPPs, and I actually have to check the price on the other guy because I didn't even look at it. And you know exactly who I'm talking about already. Yeah, the price is good. Pat Connaughton, Bobby Portis. 2 guys that are really good point per minute producers. If the game gets out of hand, I think they would be on the floor in closing situations. Certainly Portis, I think, would. And man, I don't think those guys are going to be owned in GPPs. So I think if you're playing lineups that don't have Warriors, that, like, you could use a Giannis and assume Giannis is just super efficient in the time, but even better in the lineups that aren't using Giannis, let's say you're using Luka or something like that, use like a Bobby Portis, use a Pat Connaughton, someone like that, because you're leveraging yourself against Giannis already with your decision for Luka. And the best way for Giannis to not hit his performance is a blowout that limits his minutes and allows the bench players to play more minutes.
Yeah, and something, just circling back to Marcus Smart, we talked about this in the preseason that their bench stinks. And so in games where they're trying to win and it's a close game, I think you could see a lot of these starters playing big minutes. You have Jaylen Brown up at 37.5. Tatum, I guess Tatum didn't play as much. He played 33.
He didn't, but it was just this weird first half rotation. The second half was the minutes you'd expect. So yeah. I think these guys are going to be, I think their baseline is going to be 35 to 38. Like, their baseline is high.
Yeah.
And so I think you're going to get some 33s, some 32s, some 31s. I don't think you're going to get a lot of 20s. And I think you're going to get an occasional 40.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I'm not super in on Middleton is because I think I prefer Jaylen Brown for a little bit cheaper. And he went off last night. He continues to get better every year. The minutes are going to be there. Do you prefer Jaylen to Middleton as well?
That's a good question. Looking at price tag, yeah, a little bit cheaper price tag. I think I do. I think I do. Yeah, yeah. I think I like the more that I talk. Like I docked obviously the Milwaukee guys from what they did last night, but this is it's kind of a trippy situation for me because the number I'm projecting them at now is kind of the number that like I thought was their baseline, and so I'm not really deducting for the blowout, but I'm adjusting my priors based off of last night just a little bit. So like you could even come down like another minute, and if Augustine plays, I would from like all these guys, and so yeah, I think I like the ceiling on Jaylen Brown a little bit more than Middleton, even though Middleton was so good last night. I wonder what the ownership will be on those two guys because nobody likes playing Middleton. Middleton just is never owned.
Jalen's going
I
to be
feel like
owned a lot.
I feel like I play Chris Middleton every Christmas. I feel like it's worked once out of like six, but I feel like I've been doing it for a while.
Where does Jimmy Butler compare to these guys? Because he's a little bit more expensive, but I think you're probably picking like one out of these range, maybe two. Butler had 7 steals last night, I think. There's some crazy defensive stats last night. He had 7 steals. Miles Turner with 8 blocks of playing against him in my season-long league. I'm not too pleased about that. But yeah, where does Jimmy Butler compare to Jalen and Middleton?
I just have a hard time with it. Like I got his minutes up to where they were last night, but I just we've seen it with LeBron, and Jimmy's that guy that's a veteran guy that played forever in the postseason. So he would be a clear step down for me from those guys. He's also more expensive.
Yeah. He's not really hitting the lineups on DraftKings. I'm looking at the FanDuel.
And remember when I talked about like being a little bit uncertain on how good New Orleans is defensively right now, like Miami has 114 and a half implied total, which is solid. It's not it's not outlandish for them. They're a very efficient offensive team because they shoot so many threes, but they just struggled to hit that mark against Orlando, and I think New Orleans might be a better defensive team than Orlando this year, which is kind of weird to say, but I think that might be the case. So I just, in general, like the Miami guys, I want to have like a really strong price discount and a really strong feeling on their minute ceiling. And I don't really have those things on Jimmy.
Yeah. That game has the lowest overall total of any game. The other guy that we should include that I accidentally skipped over at shooting guard is Paul George, who I don't know, maybe he's taking all the criticism to heart because he looked fantastic in that game. And you had noted that maybe Kawhi looked a little slow, and I don't know. I thought he looked good at times and maybe a little slow at times throughout the course of the game. But maybe Paul George is going to be the alpha for a little bit here. I mean, Kawhi doesn't really seem to care, and he was taking a lot of shots and he was making them. I don't know. I'm liking Paul George. I think he's probably a building block on this slate.
I think so too. And this is all getting into kind of the land of narrative, so it's a little bit tricky, but Paul George started. Remember, it was it 2 years ago that we were all like, "Oh, Paul George MVP, Paul George, first half of the season, right, with Oklahoma City," and I feel like, and he said this in the post game interview with the TNT guys. He said, the last 2 years he's had 2 different shoulder surgeries, and he hasn't had an off season of health. And he said this year he was healthy, and he was like, it feels good. It feels different. And I kind of think that he's a guy that might start stronger during seasons, and then the punishment, because he's not that big of a guy and he plays around a lot of screens and is a physical defender, maybe the punishment kind of wears him down during the course of the season. And I think Kawhi is kind of taking the other approach, which is like kind of the LeBron approach of, I'm going to work myself into the shape that I want to be in over the course of the season, like kind of manage myself. And so that's one of the things that's like looping around in my head on reasons I'm trying to take advantage of Paul early and maybe not Kawhi as much right now. And also the sense that Paul is discounted from Kawhi a decent bit. And Ty Lue said, the quote in Gallagher's matchups column, Ty Lue said that they want Paul George to lead that second unit and just get shots up, basically. So I think the usage is going to be there. We've seen that with some of these second unit guys like Karis LeVert the other night, Andrew Wiggins, although in a very inefficient way. there were a lot of shots there, and I think there's going to be a lot of shots there for Paul George.
Yeah, his price is a little prohibitive on DraftKings. He was 7-8 on the opening slate, and he's up to 8-7 now, so that's not ideal, but he's still super cheap. Super cheap over on FanDuel. So I think he's probably, either the first or second. We have him listed as the second best shooting guard on FanDuel, but I might slide him up to one after thinking through it a little bit. I definitely think I want him. All right, let's get back to small forward. Michael Porter Jr.'s price is just silly on FanDuel. I think he's 5'2" or 5'4". He also was a guy that got in foul trouble the last game. So if you're looking at his minutes played, they went to overtime as well. But I think it looks, he's starting. We weren't sure if he was going to start. There was a lot of back and forth with Mike Malone about him and Barton and saying things about, maybe the best players don't start, et cetera, et cetera. I wasn't sure if that was directed at Barton or Porter. Regardless, I think he's going to be playing, around 31, 32 minutes probably if he's starting, right? And I mean, come on, 5'4" or 5'2" or whatever it is, like it's way too cheap for Porter. So he's my favorite small forward play on FanDuel.
Yeah, he played, I think it was 19 second half minutes. And again, to your point, you can't just like times to it because the foul trouble in the first, sometimes guys get to make it up. But the thing that I'll note, and again, wish I had an injury report, but JaMychal Green's absence has made that Denver front court very, very thin. And they are not trusting of the guys behind Jokic and behind Millsap. And so what we saw last game, especially when Porter got into foul trouble, they were like, well, F it. We're going to play Paul and Jokic a lot, and we're going to play Barton a decent bit, but we're also going to play like PJ Dozier, who's a bigger guard, and him and Gary Harris can kind of guard threes. And so they were not like, hey, we're going to play Zeke Nnaji or Bol or like Hartenstein. They played a few minutes. They just they're not comfortable with those guys in the same way they have been comfortable in the past with like Mason Plumlee, which to me is like, watch out for Jokic this year, man, because I think you're going to get more 35s and 36s in terms of minutes games from Jokic than we have in the past, because I think they lack confidence in some of the guys behind him, especially with JaMychal Green banged up early on. And at some point, Millsap will get banged up, and that'll just be the situation that happens naturally. But I think right now, Porter, I've got him at 32 minutes. If he played 35, it wouldn't surprise me. If he played like 28, wouldn't surprise me either. He's just a player that, Malone singled out some defensive issues. He wasn't rebounding the ball. He got beat on the tip in. Like, he singled out some issues, as he likes to do with MPJ. But generally, his approach since the playoffs has been to call Michael Porter Jr. out, but then give him plenty of opportunities to redeem himself on the floor. That was a change in approach from earlier in the season last year, when it was call Michael Porter Jr. out and not play him. So I think while MPJ still has a wider range of outcomes than most, I feel pretty good about the minutes opportunity, and the price on FanDuel is silly. On DraftKings, I think he's going to be more of a good tournament play because 6'7" is a pretty hefty price tag when you start comparing it to guys like Jaylen Brown, Chris Middleton, so on and so forth, that are kind of priced somewhat around him.
Yeah, and there's a question in chat about if we have a guy listed on one site and not the other, do we like him on both sites? And sometimes yes, but a lot of times it's a price issue. And if there's a big gap, like in this case, what it would really mean, if we're listing the guy on either site, we probably like his situation. So occasionally it's a spot we don't like, but the price is just so low that we have to list him. But usually it's a spot we like. So if he's not listed on the other one and you can see a big price difference, then that means he'd probably be a good tournament target because people aren't going to play him.
Exactly. The other thing that I'll note is sometimes it's just the positional stuff. Like on FanDuel, you're in these tight positional requirements that we have. And sometimes we're putting 5 guys down. Sometimes there's not 5 guys we really like. Mm-hmm. And that 5th guy is just kind of like, he's the 5th guy. And so if you hear us talking about a position that's not very good and the 4th or 5th guy on there isn't listed on DraftKings, that's probably a guy we're not super enthusiastic about in general. It's just a positional scarcity issue.
Yeah, and Brandon Ingram kind of fits that mold to close out small forward here. It's not a great matchup. I don't think you want to be spending at small forward because there's all these other guys, Porter, Dorian Finney-Smith, who is just kind of like a minute play. Who's always, just there's not a ton to say about him. We already talked about Hero. Batum is still stone minimum on FanDuel, so if Morris misses again, I think he's fine. So I'm just looking to spend elsewhere. I think Ingram's okay. The price tag's okay. The matchup isn't great. It's just not really fitting my builds there, and he's not really a consideration on DraftKings.
Yeah. Ingram at 7,300 is a good price on FanDuel, but not a great price on DraftKings. All these guys, like small forward, has a shockingly good number of plays on FanDuel for the size of the slate, and it's just they're all priced softly, and some of them aren't small forwards. Like Tyler Hero, I don't know how he earned the small forward designation, but there you go. Boston just released their injury report, at least via Twitter. No surprises there. Taco Falls out. Romeo Langford and Kemba Walker out. That's the same thing that they rolled game one. So no surprises there, but they weren't really the ones I'm interested in trying to follow. Denver and Milwaukee are the ones that I'm looking at the most closely.
Yeah, my favorite thing with FanDuel so far is Daniel Tice. He starts at power forward last night, and then they move him to center for this slate. It's like, come on, man. All right.
I mean, maybe FanDuel is just in the predictive positional modeling business now.
I guess.
They got it right game one, and now maybe Tice doesn't start game two, and maybe they'll be right again.
Yeah.
Brooklyn just released their status report. Just Nick Claxton is out, which is no changes there. So the next release is at 5:30 on the injury report. If I get information that changes things, I'll certainly update content and projections and whatnot.
All right, let's talk about a punt play on DraftKings. I mean, the only two guys that are really standing out to me under 4K are Maxi Kleber and Connaughton. And you already mentioned you like Connaughton a little bit, but it was maybe kind of a blowout play. I think he's fine regardless.
Yeah.
He's 3.2. Kleber is 3.5. Do you like Maxi? I don't know. Or do you just try and stay away from that range and just stay in like the 4K and above guys?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see where ownership comes in, because the challenge is that if you want to play Giannis or you want to play Luka or you want to play AD or whatever, you kind of need one of these guys. And so ownership might really condense on them, which then makes them weaker plays. I think Connaughton, he is one of these guys, though, that is DJ Augustine dependent. If Augustine's going to play, then I think Connaughton's minutes come down to maybe 20. Just because I have to start pulling minutes from guys that are in the rotation. And so then he gets a little bit more fragile. I think Kleber's minutes and role is really, really secure, pending like he avoids foul trouble, which is a risk in a game against the Lakers. But I think in general in tournaments, this range has a very good chance of getting over-owned, which is why I was talking about kind of the balanced builds, I think being really strong approaches for tournaments. But I do like the upside relative to the price tag for Connaughton more than Kleber. I think Kleber's role is a little bit more stable between the two of them. Whether that makes like Kleber a better cash game play, it's kind of marginal, because these guys aren't gonna. When I talk about upside, it's like what guy can get me 30, and when I talk about stability, it's like what guy is gonna get me like 16, and like the range in between those is not really like a huge difference in terms of results.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. Do you think the next guy in the conversation, I think, is Dorian Finney-Smith, who's $700 more? Is it worth paying that extra $700? Because I do think he's got a higher floor than Maxi, but he doesn't have a ton of upside either. So to me, they're pretty comparable plays, and I'd probably just see whatever I had money left for. But yeah. I don't know. Any thoughts on the safety of DFS?
I mean, 4,800 is a lot for DFS.
Oh, I'm looking. Sorry, I was looking at FanDuel. He's 4.2 on FanDuel.
Yeah, the FanDuel price, like I said, everybody at small forward on FanDuel is kind of in play, but 4,800, you're starting to ask for a lot. Yeah. It's like the same problem with Batum. Like Batum was like 4 or 3.8 or something like that the first game out. 4.1, I think he was. Now he's 4.5. You're just starting to put a little bit more pressure on that.
Yeah.
And so especially in tournaments, like I think those guys are really, really ownership dependent, is what I would say, because their range of outcomes on ceiling is really limited. So you really want them like only if they're going to be super low owned, and then like they're like 25 matters a lot if they find that ceiling. Which I feel like we got a ceiling game from Batum already. Like I feel like you couldn't have run much better on that Batum game in game one.
I do think I would potentially consider him at minimum on FanDuel if Morris is out.
Yeah.
All right.
It's just that position is so much stronger. This like there's legitimately good plays at small forward on FanDuel now.
Yeah. Durant still remains a good price. I mean, 8.5, he should be more than that. He looked good to me, and they just didn't really need him. Kyrie kind of went off, but he was scoring at ease to start the game. I think let's just assume that he's at least probably 90% of the guy we know. I mean, maybe it'll fall off as the season goes on. I don't know, but that's a great price tag. And maybe he'll get lost in the shuffle a little bit here. He's not really hitting builds. You know, I don't know if you have a lot to say. We got to get to center here.
Yeah, the thing that I'll just say real quickly on Durant is I think he looks great. It's not the same role as 10K, 11K Durant. And that's the thing we need to come to grips with. We all need to come to grips with. Steve Nash had a quote saying, like, he's not going out there trying to win the scoring title. Like, it's going to be a softer role. And so I actually think, like, the 8.5 price, while it's, like, nice, I don't think it's, like, screaming bargain.
Yep.
I think it's, like, slight bargain. I think he's more of, like, a 9K player now than a 10, 11K player.
Fair enough. And the projections would agree with you. He's not really popping. And that, you know, it's just sometimes you got to get through your head that this is a new role. But the good news is he looked good and he was scoring. Yeah, I think a lot of teams are going to score with these on the Warriors, but remains to be seen.
Especially with that try.
Yeah. All right, center. We talked about Kleber, Millsap, who's power forward and center eligible. I mean, basically, it's just like it's early in the season, so he's got some juice, and JaMychal Green isn't playing, so his minutes should be pretty safe and on the higher end. So I like Millsap here. He's not a guy I really love playing normally, but it just kind of lines up, and his price tag's pretty decent.
Yeah, I need to know on JaMychal Green. That's the thing. Like, if JaMychal Green is available to play, Millsap's range goes from 28 to 32 to like 22 to 26, maybe 22 to 28. Like, I think the JaMychal Green thing impacts him a lot. He missed a lot of open shots. He benefited from Porter's foul trouble, but he also just benefited from them playing against a smaller team, which the Clippers are willing to go like kind of smaller as well. So I don't think that's an issue there in terms of the matchup. But JaMychal Green is very, very important to his projection.
Yeah, I'm not considering if JaMychal Green goes. Trez Harrell, I think something that you should keep in mind is Marc Gasol was in foul trouble. It was also a revenge game for him. Maybe they let him run a little bit more. And he was playing blowout minutes at the end. So I think there was a lot of things in his favor. He did play well. His price tag has come up. I think he's a stronger play on FanDuel than DraftKings. I think he's all the way up at 6K on DraftKings, so I'm not really considering him there. But on FanDuel at 5-1.
I had him at like 26 minutes on opening night, and I have him at 28 now after playing 32. And I feel like I'm stretching it a little bit too. Yeah. So just be careful with him. I think he's going to get over-owned in tournaments.
Yeah. What about on the cheap end? You've got Weissman and Daniel Tice are both, I believe, 4.2. Yeah. And Zubac is only 500 more at 4.7. Any lean amongst those guys? You know, I think Weissman. Go ahead.
The good news about Weissman is I think they're going to find a way to get him his minutes as long as he doesn't like foul out. Because we saw in that last game, like he played all the blowout minutes basically. So they're going to emphasize his development, which they should. So that makes his minutes a little bit more secure. The problem is like the range on his minutes is pretty narrow, and there's probably more room to the downside than the upside. And he might come with more ownership. I think Zubac is a much better tournament play. I think Weissman has a chance to be over-owned. But I'm telling you right now, the tournament play of the day, baby, it's Bobby Portis.
I like it, man. I like it a lot.
It's Bobby Portis. Like in the preseason, him and Brook Lopez were playing pretty much even minutes in that first half. And then if you look at the popcorn machine, do I even have it in front of me? At the popcorn machine in last night's game, like Bobby played like a solid like 10 minutes in the first half, and then like didn't have a fourth quarter rotation because they started with this Brook Lopez rotation. And like if you can give me like 21 minutes of Bobby Portis going up against like Marquise Chris in the second unit, like those two are just going to be jacking up shots. And so I really like Bobby Portis in tournaments, which I'm probably destroying the ownership a little bit, but I think this is a public enough slate that it probably won't be destroyed entirely.
Yeah, I think overall center's pretty weak. So, and interestingly enough, Giannis is a center on DraftKings now. So I think DraftKings, I'm kind of looking at the top three guys. I mean, Bam's a fine play. I just don't think I'm looking to spend money there, maybe in some tournaments, but I would be looking at Maxey, Millsap, or Giannis, I think, on DraftKings. All right. Any other thoughts on the slate before we're going to have, I guess we got to do the flag plan every day. We'll get to that.
Yeah, do flag plan. And there's like a question or two I want to take.
Okay. Yeah, fire away.
Flag plan. So one of the questions we got just came in was, will ETR NBA or myself or you be tweeting when projections get updated throughout the NBA day? Adam Levitan does a good job of retweeting news, letting us know when top plays are updated. Love the content. Cheers. Thanks, Chris, for the question. I would say what we're trying to figure out is the best way to update things and update you guys as subscribers. We have timestamps on all the projections that are automated. The challenge with NBA that's different from NFL is NFL news comes in all at once at one time and you have tons of time to digest it. NBA news comes in haphazardly and like right before lock. And so it's very hard to like update projections, update top plays, then get a tweet out and different things like that. So what we're thinking about doing is maybe incorporating like the labs Twitter scroll into our top plays column and figuring out so like you can see what the news items are and then you can see on the projections pages when things are getting updated with the timestamp there. We will try to when we have time to communicate the information and it's really slate changing information, we will certainly communicate that in a way of like tweeting we've updated top plays and with a note and stuff like that. But we want to be really cognizant of having our resources dedicated to getting the projections as good as we can get them. And that takes time. And sometimes news flow in NBA is very haphazard.
Good answer. Do you have another question?
That was the question I had that came in.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you had another one.
No.
All right. You want me to go with flag plan or are you ready?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm going to go with Josh Richardson. I think he's a good play on both sites. I think he's a really nice pivot off of some chalk. I don't think he'll be owned that much. Yeah, that's basically it. I will say that there's no like screaming play to me on this slate that really stands out as someone I love, and that's kind of went with him as just like a balanced flag plant play. But nothing like I felt really good about Murray yesterday, so nothing quite on that level. But I'm definitely gonna be mixing him in quite a bit.
I mean, I feel like I'm pod committed on this now, but I really do like Bobby Portis.
Yeah, man, let's do it.
I really do like Bobby Portis in tournaments. So I'm gonna go with the Bobby Portis flag plan.
All right. I'll take a few more questions. Or we didn't talk about Joker. I think that.
Oh yeah.
We should definitely mention him at least.
Yeah, I mean the challenge with Joker is he's priced now in this like Luka Giannis range. Certainly has the upside to pay that off. At least on DraftKings, he is on FanDuel. 9.7 is a little bit more accessible. I think it comes down to roster construction stuff on FanDuel, but he's a great play. I think the floor is really, really solid with him. I do think this will be a tougher matchup than Sacramento. I think Sacramento lacks some good defensive bigs. I think Ibaka is a guy that can actually, do a decent job against Jokic in terms of like size. I think Zubats is another guy that does a decent job on Jokic, but Jokic got Zubats in foul trouble all through that playoff series last year. So I think it's another like fine spot for Jokic. The price tag is solid. I would say in terms of, if you ask me in terms of points per dollar, what play I felt strongest about on the spends, it would probably be Giannis, and then it would probably be Jokic after that. On FanDuel, at least. On DraftKings, it's a little tougher with Luka, but I mean, it's right there. Like, I feel pretty good about Jokic.
I like it. Ingram 4.5 assists over. Thoughts? I don't know.
What's the detail level that we have on the projections that we can look at this? It's on site.
Yes, we have the projections on the site that will tell you what we have them projected at.
Let me look at what we have Ingram projected at as I load those in front of me now. But my instinct is, the challenge with Ingram from a projection standpoint is trying to figure out where that role is on the assist side. We've got him at 4. So, probably a no bet situation. If the role is as strong as it was last game, which I think is influenced a little bit by that Lonzo Ball foul trouble, then we'll be undershooting what his role is, and that number might be beatable. But I think 4.5 seems like a pretty good number right now to stay away from.
There you have it. For cash single entry, do you go with Hero or Bledsoe? Bledsoe.
Yeah, I think Bledsoe's a better cash play. I think Hero's a better tournament play.
All right, guys. Thanks for spending some of your Christmas Eve with us. Like I said, all of this information is up every day on Established Run. We got the projections, the top plays. We're doing the shows 4 times a week, definitely on the big slates. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. I think it's going to be a fun slate tomorrow. Stay around your computers and make sure you're making some changes as the day goes on, whether your team's good or you need some help. You can always make adjustments. And you want to throw the people the old promo code as a secondary Yeah,
Christmas
Merry
gift.
Christmas to everyone. If you use ETR 5, it'll get you 5% off. So we've already really underpriced all the NBA stuff. Shouldn't be giving you any discount on it, but 5% off. Use ETR 5. And to the professional sports gambler guy who's just been spamming the chat the entire time, come play me heads up, buddy. Let's do it. All right, guys, I got my flame boss. I'm watching the temperature go down. I got to go see what's going on, make sure my ribs are good for dinner tonight. So thank you very much for watching.